Welcome to Get Better Basketball Live. I'm Coach DeMarco, and today my guest is Coach Mark Cascio, owner of Courtside Consulting, a former state championship coach in high school, and current assistant basketball coach at Appalachian State University. Coach Cascio has a wealth of knowledge of the game of basketball, and you're going to love this episode. Another Get Better Basketball Live is up now. As we transition now into part two, I wanted to talk about small-sided games, which is something that I know you spend a lot of time on. I know you've shared a lot on small-sided games. And before we get into maybe a couple of games that you feel like have worked really well for your team, just wanted to ask you, I guess in general, what makes a good small-sided game? What are the components that coaches should really think about as they're incorporating these games into their team? And I know it could be different based on kind of the needs of your team, but just a general look at what you think makes, a good game for a coach to incorporate with their team.
Yeah. So you already touched on something, just kind of like what your team needs. I think the best small-sided games are probably the ones that you can come up with or the ones that you can tweak. So a lot of coaches will reach out to me and ask like, hey, can you share a small-sided game with me? And I'm like, well, sure, but I don't know what you want. What are you looking for? Because we do several different ones, but they all have a different reason. We don't just throw a dart at the wall and say, let's do that one today. And I think even better than that, like you talked about like that or asked about good components of a small-sided game. You can change those, which is the cool part about small-sided games or just anything when you use constraints to the drill. You can use the same drill and have a different constraint every day. A lot of the coaches, they'll see, they might see video of my team do a small-sided game with a certain constraint on there, and they think that's the only way we do it. And they say like, well, why do you do it this way? It's just like, well, I just did it that way that day because we needed this or we needed that. And I think that's that's kind of the sign of a master coach is you can use the same drill and get something completely different out of it. And it's a way I've grown a lot and I'm still growing. And it's been really good at App State. We're doing some new things. Like I'm bringing some new ideas in, and I haven't been in a quote unquote new situation in 8 years because I've spent 8 years at my previous job. So now I'm teaching some of this stuff from scratch, and it's made me come up with new constraints or constraints I haven't used in a while, and it's made me be a better teacher. And just to give you some examples of what I mean by that is most of the small-sided games that we're doing right now, we're focusing on the play after the play. So basically Dominoes, if you're a Twitter coach, you've heard Dominoes. And what we want to see how our team reacts when we've gained an advantage. So now the quote unquote play is over, and now we're just going to drive, kick, space, share until we get a great shot. So what we usually do is put offense at a big advantage, maybe 4 offensive players against 3 or defenders, or 3 offensive players against 2 defenders. And you can just throw them out there and say, go play and see what happens. Most of the time they'll show you what you need a coach. So if you're over dribbling in that scenario, then just take the dribble out. So we might go 4-on-3 closeouts and offense can't dribble. So we're going to let the ball do the work. The ball is going to move faster than any defender. So we're going to use ball speed to create a big advantage shot. So that would be one way where we can use, 4-on-3 closeouts to really emphasize the pass. And then once our teams get a good grasp of that, we'll just let them have the dribble now. And then, reminder of when do we want to use our dribble in this scenario? It should be to drive a hard closeout, right? So other than that, we want to move the ball. So just an example of how you can use one small-sided game, and by taking away the dribble or adding the dribble, that drill is going to look completely different. And then kind of the last tweak that we'll do there is we'll put a fourth defender at half court. So now we're starting 4-on-3. The neutral or the fourth defender's at half. And I'll tell offense, when you use your dribble, that fourth defender is going to be live and they can come in. So now it's like I can use my dribble, but if I don't, we still have the advantage. Or if I do use my dribble, we got to be really efficient. So those are some favorites.
They better be really intentional when they do decide to use that dribble in that example. And I like that a lot. And you talked about, the constraint in that example, not being able to dribble in the first example, and then the kind of how you progress that small sided game based on what you might need or be working on with your team. Could you give us a couple of other examples, maybe just one or two, of other types of constraints that you might use in a small sided game to teach players based on, whatever skill or whatever, situation you're trying to help them to improve at?
Yeah. So, a lot of our small sided games start with a certain type of advantage, like I said. So it might be a big advantage. We could we could start 4-on-4 and give the offense a small advantage. So they might be shoulder to shoulder on the start, or everybody's probably done this one where you put the ball on the defender's back. Whenever that ball goes away, we're live. One, just before we get into the constraints, I love those because it's basically live shell. Offense is going to get beat. And now you're going to have to help. You're going to have to cover down, and then you're going to have to X out on the backside. And offense is all about rotation and beating all about advantages and beating the rotation. So when you have defense helping and rotating, you're working both sides of the ball. But a constraint that I would put on there would maybe be no burn cuts, because what happens a lot of times, especially in a small sided game, is when you're playing 3-on-3 or 4-on-4, there's just so much space that if you allow that first burn cut on the drive, it's going to be a layup every time, because that's just such a long cover down. So that would be a constraint, might be like no burn cuts or no cutting. Would be one where we're going to really emphasize like seeing help and then spraying it to a perimeter player. It could be, on your first catch, you have to shoot it or drive it. That way we immediately eliminate like a triple threat or a ball stick. Another one just with the ball stick, because they drive me nuts, and it's a question I get a lot, is anytime the ball, sticks, it's an automatic turnover. Something like that could be a constraint, just to really create the environment that you want. If you just want an attack, then anything that's non-attacking becomes a turnover.
That's awesome, Coach. And just thinking about small-sided games, you've given us a lot of really great examples of games and ideas and adjustments coaches can make. What are a couple of, and I know you talked about this already, it really depends on what coaches need and specific to what they are looking for, but what's an example of a couple small-sided games that you feel like you kind of go back to because you can kind of tweak them a little bit to meet the different needs of players, or something like that, where you feel like you keep going back to those for whatever reason?
Yeah, so I'll give you a few where we start with a big advantage. They're still Dominoes related, just because I just think that's such an important part of the game, and something I think that's neglected when teaching dominoes or advantage basketball is that your team has to be able to recognize when they're in dominoes. So we'll do a lot of things where we're going to start with dominoes so we can feel it. So one that we go to is just a 2-on-2 drill. It's going to be basically a closeout drill where you have two offensive players on the wings, two defenders in the paint, and they're circling up. Just running around in a circle. That way there's going to be a little bit of rotation. Coach has the ball at the top of the key. He's going to throw it to either one of the offensive players on the wings. And we will tell the defense, the defenders, that defense can't give up a 3 on that first catch. So when we throw it out to the wing, defense is going to run that shooter off the line. The other player that didn't close out is now in a help situation. So what I like about that 2-on-2, it just gives offense like 1, maybe 2 really quick reads slash decisions where it's going to be just like a quick hit, just kick out, drive, kick, three, where we can just go through some skill development cues as well, as far as how we attack the closeout, defensively, how we help, um, to how we make that pass or how we space off of that initial drive. It might be, a baseline drive might get you in a position where you're going to the corner for the drift. How we catch the ball. Saw something on Twitter the other day that the shot begins with the catch. I love that, talking about shot prep. So I think those little quick hits gives you an opportunity to give them dominoes, but also, since you're not just playing for a long time, you can really break down some skill stuff in there. And then imagine the same drill 4-on-4. So 4 defensive players are in the paint, 4 offensive players are out. Coach throws it out. Defense can't give up a 3. So you're going to get a 4-on-3 for a couple seconds. And it's, now you can kind of emphasize some conceptual stuff as far as like, we call it going 2 out. So we're going to drive, hit the paint, and we want to go 2 passes out, just to maintain that advantage, or to expand that advantage from maybe a small one where we got a good shot, where we get a great shot. So we'd call that paint to great. So those are 2 that I really like. Something with that kind of flavor would be just start 4-on-4. And then when you yell somebody's name, they have to run the half court, and then get back in the play. So you give offense a little bit of an advantage there. And then another one would be, you probably already do this as a coach. It's the closeout drill where you're 3-on-3. You have 3 players on the baseline, and they throw it along the baseline. The ball goes all the way around the horn, and we start with a closeout. We used to do that as just like a defensive drill. Now it's become a really fun, small-sided game for us, because we'll give that same constraint where offense can't shoot on that first catch. Defense has to, run them off the line. So now you get that 2 to 3 second advantage, opportunity to go 2 out of the paint, expand the advantage. And then if defense gets neutral, then you're just playing basketball. So those have been fun ones. I'll share one more that I really like, that kind of mixes some big advantage, small advantage, and neutral in there. Neutral meaning neither team has an advantage. And that's when you got to create it with an action, like a ball screen or a zoom, a get, a down screen, whatever you run. This one's called power play. I forgot where I got this from. But let's say we're starting 4-on-4, and the blue team shoots a shot. Well, whoever shot that shot for the blue team is going to step off. So now the gold team, let's say, is they have 4 players, but the blue team has 3. Well, we're going to go down to the other end of the floor playing 4-on-3. So we got big advantage. Once somebody on that gold team shoots, they step off. So now we're going 3-on-3. So you just kind of get a nice flow of different types of advantages for either team. And then you just kind of play it till you end 1-on-1.
I like that. I like that a lot, Coach. It's almost the reverse of that. Start 2 versus 1 and build up to 5 versus 5. And this one, you're kind of working your way back. And those are some really great games. And I think there's a lot of ways that coaches can think about using them with their team, and also, maybe tweaking them a little bit based on what they're trying to accomplish. And you gave some great examples as well on how to tweak them. So just thinking about small-sided games in practice. So, if you're playing that 2 versus 2 closeout, SSG, for example, and players are circling the paint, about how long are you doing that for in practice, just to give coaches an idea? And then the follow-up, and I guess I'll get to it now, which is, what is the scoring like? What the competitiveness in that SSG? Are you always scoring them? Are you highlighting certain things as you score a small-sided game like that? So what is that part? So I guess the timing and the scoring piece.
Yeah, so I like from the last about 5 minutes, and I've found a good way to do this is exactly what you said, is score it, and we will play 2s and 3s to 8. So they will go pretty quick, especially if you're giving offense an advantage. You could, if you hit 2 threes, it's going to be 6 to something, right? 6-2, 6-3, 6-0. So they go fairly quickly. Sometimes we'll play, if we're doing like the 4-on-3 closeout drill or the 2-on-2 closeout drill, it might be, 3-4 possessions and we're moving on. Because a lot of times when we do a 2-on-2 drill, it'll be followed by something 3-on-3, 4-on-4 that's emphasizing the same skill. And that's a way to vary your small sided games too. You can do the same thing, but the less players you have, it's going to be tougher on the defense. The more players you add, there's going to be less space. So kind of we kind of combine what you had mentioned with time and then how to make it competitive. I have found playing 2s and 3s to 8 gives you about a 5-minute game. We all have those practices where scoring 8 points might take 20 minutes. So one thing that we do and that comes up is let's say we have like a 2-on-2, a 3-on-3, and a 4-on-4 drill back to back to back in practice. And we are just cold and we cannot hit a shot in the 2-on-2 drill. And the score is 3-2 after 6 minutes. We'll just carry that score over to the 3-on-3 game. So now it's 3-2 and we just huddle them and say, hey, look, we're going to move on. We're carrying the score over. And that kind of led to an idea of we would have segments where we would purposely carry the score over. And at the end of that segment, the score might be 20-17. That's a great opportunity to throw in a special situation there because they've worked for that 20-17. You're not just throwing, 60-65 up on the scoreboard and they don't really have any investment in there. Those are always your most competitive special situations. That's when they're amped, they're arguing calls, which we don't like actually, because we want them to have a little bit of mental toughness, but part of me likes it because they're invested and it's not just practice, they're actually competing. So that's a kind of a way where we keep it flowing, but we also keep it competitive.
Well, Coach, I really appreciate your time here, and I promise 3 more questions I have for you, just related to small-sided games. As coaches think about making practices competitive, just curious in your thoughts, will you have set teams for a practice or for a week of practice where they're going to compete with those teams in certain SSGs, whether it's 2-on-2 or 4 versus 4? Do you mix that up throughout practice? Just curious on, what I know it's different for everybody, but curious on what your process is typically when you're creating these teams for these small-sided games.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that because this is something that going back to my mentor in Kemper Todd, he taught me a great way to format practice, and I haven't found a better way. So I'm always looking for a better way. This one is undefeated in my 16, 17 years of coaching. So one, I think it's important to track wins. If you're into a cauldron, I would go win percentage and not just total wins, because if somebody's injured, misses practice, you don't want them to just lose. It's not a true reflection of who impacts winning unless you're doing win percentage, in my opinion. And then we love for teams to be even. So like if we're doing any of these small-sided games we've talked about, I want it to be varsity versus varsity. And not just that, I don't want it to be first team versus second team. We are almost always split. And a good way to do that is just give them partners. So every day on the practice plan, when I was a head coach, I would post my practice plan in the locker room. They would be able to see who their partner was. Now, I wouldn't tell them what color jersey they're in, but if you and I are partners, it just means we're going to be in opposite color jerseys the entire practice. If we're doing partner shooting, you and I are going to rebound for each other. If we're playing one-on-one, you and I are guarding each other. If you're on the court for 5-on-5 play, that means I'm on the court and I'm guarding you. So when you sub out, I sub out. So we sub as partners. And that way, I don't really care what the teams are. I know they're going to be even. I know we're going to have the right amount of handlers, the right amount of forwards, because I'm determining the partners. It usually works out where guards are partners with guards. But another way that I like to do this is scouting report. You can build scouting report into this without even having to talk about it. And if I'm going to, if Johnny is going to have to guard a lights out shooter on Friday night, well, I'm going to make him partners with a shooter on Wednesday, Thursday, just so he gets a feel for that, right? Like he can't overhelp. He can't leave his closeout short. Because if he does, he's going to lose that small-sided game to 8 every time because he's guarding a shooter. So that's been the way that we have formatted practices. I love the fact that it's competitive. I determine the matchups, but they get to determine the teams. And I think just giving them that little bit of ownership kind of makes it, they can't say, well, coach stuck me on this team. It's like you kind of get to pick your team every day at practice.
Well, I'm happy I asked that question because I I can see why that method is undefeated. That's awesome. That's a great way to do it. And I think it really, when you partner those two players up who are going to be competitive with one another, I think it simplifies it for them. But they're going to have chances throughout practice to kind of compete in a fun, good-natured way. But I can imagine that competition heats up throughout the practice. So that's very cool, Coach. And just wanted to ask, just last couple of questions here. And um, what's the, I know this is tough because it probably fluctuates from practice to practice and the day before a game and stuff like that. But, just a guesstimate, I guess, if you will, of what percentage of practice are you dedicating specifically to the game, to games or small sided games, as opposed to, I know there's other things that you're hitting in practice, whether it's scouting reports, whether it's, maybe some other, shooting and stuff like that too. But just thinking about small sided games, roughly about what percentage do you try to kind of focus in on these games based approach?
Yeah, it's a good question. Now, every practice is kind of different. Whenever I plan, I don't have like a certain template that I follow as far as like this many minutes on this many minutes on this.
Mhm.
It's really just what your team needs. Don Meyer would go through the needs assessment. So it varies. I would say, just there's three types of drills: teaching, training, and competing. If we're not teaching something, we're probably competing, unless, like you mentioned, like shooting. Like if we're working on just like getting reps of shots, which would be like your volume or comfort and confidence. That would be obviously we're competing there because we're tracking everything. So even though we're not, bone on bone, offense versus defense competing, there's a competing element in that. Um, and then anytime we're training something, it's usually like kind of a small sided game where we're just giving our players buzzwords. And then when we just want to play live, like a phase D drill, then we're hooping and coaches are hopefully going to shut up and let them play. And um, over the years, our practices have gotten more and more competitive because when you two-way teach, meaning you teach offense and defense, and really three-way, because I think you have skills in there too. Uh, there's not a lot of excuses not to compete unless you just like your practice is really really clean and you're scared that your AD is going to walk into the gym and think that you lost your mind. But I it's a great question because I really do think the only reason why coaches don't compete is they think it's going to be ugly. And if you're the type of coach that thinks, or wants your practices to be clean, I was there at one point. I would just question whether practice is for you or for your players. And honestly, the answer is probably that it's for you because you want it to be this perfect practice. But perfect practice is one that transfers to the game.
Absolutely, Coach. That's really, really well said. And just want to wrap up with this question here, which is advice for coaches, that want to incorporate small sided games, or maybe they're already incorporating some small sided games in practice, but really want to improve upon that process. And you've given so many great pointers and coaching points and things to think about. Is there anything else that you could share with coaches who are watching, whether they're at the high school level, the college level, really, across the board, as they're implementing small sided games?
Yeah, two things come to mind immediately. Is one is view the game as an application of skills, and small sided games you're just adding the game context to your skill development. So you're kind of moving from the technique into the actual what's going to transfer to the games. So just think of it as skill development as well, and not just quote unquote games. You're putting your players in a position to apply and use the skills that you're teaching. And then the second thing I would say, go into every practice with 1, 2, or 3 outcomes or objectives that you want. And then when you do that, I think it's really easy to choose or tweak or create a small sided game to get that desired outcome. So your let's say an objective is burn cutting. Well, then I'm gonna go a small sided game where we're starting with the bounce, or if it's reading the help, let's go a big advantage small sided game and allow them to dribble. That way we're forcing help in rotation, something like that. But I think when you begin with the end in mind, all the rest becomes pretty easy.
Great advice, Coach. And know you have a busy schedule there at Appalachian State, so I really appreciate you taking the time, sit down, talk basketball with us. And I will definitely be following you guys this year and hoping to see you make a run in the conference tournament and maybe March Madness at the end of the year. I know that would be a great first year for you, but whatever happens, I know I'm sure it'll be a great season for you guys.
Yeah, thanks so much, man. I appreciate you following, and honestly, I appreciate everything that you do. I'm a big fan of yours. Just I'll go on Twitter and see the Get Better basketball chat, and I rarely lurk or interact in there and don't learn 3, 4 to 5 things. So appreciate all that you're doing, and thanks so much for having me on.
Thanks so much, Coach. It's all the great coaches out there who are willing to share like you that make that what it is as well. So thank you again, and have a great day.
You too.